are joined in studio today by Bret Rodabaugh, who is a certified financial planner at LaBrunerie Financial. How are you, Bret?
I'm doing great, AC. Thanks for having me back.
Of course, always good to have you here. So, Bret, today we're talking about something everybody likes to talk about, budgeting.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Especially in today's persistent inflation environment, budgeting is more important than ever, in our opinion. And that applies to, young adults, middle-aged adults, and retirees.
Yeah.
Also, Adonica, everybody could use a little extra watchful eyes on their cash flows.
Yeah, I would say so. So a lot of times people hear the word budget, and the first thing they think of is restrictions. Restrictions. So what does budgeting actually mean?
So restriction can be a part of it, but that doesn't need to be the main focus. It really, to us, it's meaning taking control of what your cash flows are. You know, how much are you bringing in? Where is the money going? More importantly, in today's tech-heavy society, who knows how many subscriptions you've signed up for that you don't remember that you have, and to where it kind of creates this term called lifestyle creep, to where you've got this money flowing out and you really don't know what you're spending it on. And so I like to say, just controlling what your spending is what budgeting is really all about.
Okay, so controlling what your spending is, not necessarily restrictions. Okay, all right. So for somebody who has never budgeted before, what's the simplest way to get started with that?
So there's kind of just a broad rule to where ideally your post-tax income, what your take-home pay is, you want about 50% of that to go to your needs.
Okay.
30% can be budgeted for your wants, and 20% should go to savings. And that, like I said, that can apply to individuals who are still working and retirees as well. Looking at it from the retiree angle is saving for long-term care costs potentially down the road. But, as we're really looking, focusing on, early adults and middle-aged is, making sure that you are putting the effort and the energy into making sure you're able to save as well in order to, kind of pay yourself first so that you do have some cushion later down in the life when you want to retire.
Okay, so give me that percentage breakdown again real quick.
50% for your wants.
Okay.
Or sorry, 50% for your needs.
Okay, I was going to say I'm writing that down.
50% for your needs, 30% for your wants, and 20% for savings.
For savings. Okay. All right, perfect. Okay, so here's a good question. What's the biggest mistake you see people making with their money?
I think it's a kind of just decision paralysis where they're not taking that initiative to get started on, budgeting and tracking where your expenses are going. It can be scary and it's tough. It really is. And especially in today's economy is, things are tight with that inflation that's been just lingering persistently. You really do have to make an effort. It's not as easy as things might have been, in 2020, 2021. And I think it's scary, and it really is, but that's okay. I think what we're looking at here is trying to take, small steps at a time. We don't expect you to reinvent your whole life in a weekend, but it's really taking that first step of just even understanding where your expenses are.
I think hearing you admit that it's scary is comforting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not an easy thing, especially if it's not something that you're used to.
Right.
Okay. All right. So how do people stick to a budget without feeling deprived?
It's really just about, understanding where the money's going. What are these, deciding what's a need and what's a want as well. Unfortunately, your Netflix subscription is not a need. So it's really, getting those categories separated out to where you're not lumping things that you might think are wants that are into needs. And so being realistic, and also a big mistake is kind of long-term budget planning is factoring in inflation, especially with, the rising healthcare costs that we've seen with health insurance and out-of-pocket costs as well, is underestimating what that budget might need to look like 5, 10, 20 years from now as well. And that's also a very hard aspect to wrap your head around as well.
Okay. So I know some people who are going to need another person to sit down with them and help them decide what's really a need and what's really a want. because some people think Netflix is a need.
Yeah.
Like I have to watch, I have to binge that show.
Yeah.
I have to binge it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So if somebody's watching or listening and they're like, okay, what's the one thing that I really need to do after I hear or watch this segment? What is that one thing?
Yeah, it's take that first step. Sit down, with your family, and really, there's a lot of nice free budgeting apps that you can use. A lot of banks provide a kind of a basic form of that, and it does an okay job at outlining what categories your spending is. So I think really breaking down, looking at it is really the biggest takeaway, and seeing where your money's going. Another thing to not forget about are kind of those annual payments that come up throughout the year. That's maybe not a monthly recurring expense, and factoring that in your budget, because sure, you can think you're on track on your monthly, and then boom, here's a larger expense that you hadn't planned for, and so really even taking it at a whole year at a time. To see where your expenses are, and seeing which ones are recurring, which ones are just kind of one-offs is a big step as well. And don't fall into the paralysis. Just get started, and then what that'll do is once you do start formulating this budget and sticking to it, you'll feel the stress levels go down, because you're going to have a better sense of control on what your money is going to or not. And it's all meant to not be restrictive. It's meant to just de-stress you and help you understand that this is how we need to live and spend.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's all very smart and good advice for now, for the time. Okay. So close us out. Talk to us a little bit about these new accounts. And
just another quick reminder for those who haven't filed taxes yet, I know we're getting close to the tax deadline here, is the 530A accounts, which are going to be for children who are born in 2025 to 2028. $1,000 will be credited to an account that for your kids to use later down the life. And they should start to get funding around July 4th of this year, which oddly enough is the 250th anniversary of our country. But Adam Smith, the Scottish philosopher and economist, his book, The Wealth of Nations, is also celebrating its 250th anniversary, which is kind of the blueprint of what our country was founded on economically.
Well, thank you so much, Bret. And they can find you at LaBrunerie Financial.
That's right.
Thanks for
Stacey.
being here.